So welcome everybody. My name's Abe Brown, and I'm our host today for our webinar called Business Resilience Now. And so many of you have been such great supporters of this webinar. And what we've been doing is we've been talking about something that is critically important, and that's the topic of business resilience in the middle of COVID-19. And we have some incredible guests here today, and I'm going to share a little bit about them in a moment. But before we do that, many of you know I love to share my memes and talk a little bit about getting ourselves set up for success in this webinar today. And so here's a couple of things that I'll share with you, and I hope you're okay with it. But as we all know, I mean, COVID-19 has absolutely changed the world. And change can absolutely be a negative, but change can also be a positive within our lives. And so before getting into the serious stuff, and I know Roy and Tiff are going to do a great job of spelling that out, let's find a little bit of humor. And humor is actually good for your immune system. You don't have to, just wear a mask. We're not going to get into that controversy to boost your immune system. You could actually just do some more laughter. And the research on this is pretty profound. And so let's just take a look at a couple of memes. I love my memes. I mean, COVID-19 has changed a lot of things. I think a lot of people, came into 2020 with this idea that it was going to be a great year. I'm one of them. And it is going to be a great year, I think, but not the way it has. And any of you who are on Instagram, the guy with a sign. And so now his new sign is 2021 will be our year. And I just love that, right? And, it's also changed time travel. I don't know how many of you Back to the Future fans are out there, but rule number one, apparently in time travel, is never set it to 2020. And I just love that, right? And of course, it's also changed education. We live in a homeschool-based world now. And I just love that, because farm parents, when coronavirus shut down school, for them, not a problem. The rural families, they're kind of used to it, but those of us who live in the city, homeschooling has been a challenge. And another meme that kind of describes this, and I love it, is, homeschooling day one, we're 11 minutes in and everything is going well as we start pouring the alcohol, and that's kind of the world that we found ourselves in. But even vacations, I mean, my friends better start saving money from now, because in 2021, we're going to do 2 summers at once, and isn't that the truth, because, everything is shut down. And even as they gradually ease, we've still got border controls. We've got all kinds of things going on. And so that's made it really tough for people to have that social connectivity. It's also, Corona changed your relationship to your hands. Apparently, we need to be washing our hands all the time, which is, generally a good idea anyways, especially if you're like me and you're a bit of a germaphobe. But I just love this. Studies show that if you have a glass of wine in each hand, you're 100% less likely to accidentally touch your face. And I guess there would be some truth to that. And so, hey, maybe drink some more wine. But, it's also, Corona done some great things for self-awareness. This one is so funny. My commute is now from my bed to my living room, and I'm still late for work every day. Like I'm beginning to think I'm the problem, and I just love that. It absolutely baffles my mind that some people are still late for meetings in the middle of a global lockdown, that's weird, but hey, it's happening. And maybe some self-awareness is a good thing anyways. And this is our last one. We're going to talk about relationships today. And, a couple of weeks of isolation with the family, what can go wrong? And so, really today, it's really not about humor. The truth of the matter is that COVID-19 has had a profound impact itself, but then the response to COVID-19 has been profound as well. Any coach will tell you, any counselor, that there's an event and then there's our response to the event. And tragically, of course, because of the response to the event, where the economy's been shut down and things have been locked down and people have been socially isolating, and we've seen all kinds of challenges. Suicide calls have gone up, which is an absolute tragedy. And of course, no wonder. In the U.S., we're at 40 million people unemployed. That's 1/4 of the workforce. That is a tragedy. And in Canada, 7 million people. We're not a big country, so we only got about 35, 37 million of us, and one out of every five has applied for the CERB, which is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and at least 4 million have lost their jobs. And literally, folks, hundreds of thousands of businesses have closed their doors, and many of them will never reopen. And this is an absolute tragedy. And on top of that, as all of that's going on, I'm not sure if you saw this article from Forbes just actually the other day, that 25 of the wealthiest people on the planet, their net worth has grown by $255 billion. So as 40 million people in the US have lost their job, as 4 million Canadians have lost their jobs, as hundreds of thousands of small and medium-sized businesses have been absolutely taken down, the richest people have gotten richer. And how many of you think that's weird? I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but I think that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And so, you might be sitting here and saying, well, geez, man, what is the solution? I don't think we have a solution, but I think the solution is always in conversations. There's no doubt that in coronavirus, we have seen relational challenges, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of them is because of the emphasis on social distancing or social isolation. I think another reason is because in times of stress, people can revert to those unhealthy relationship patterns. And so today, I'm really excited. We've got two, I'm going to call them relationship experts on the webinar today. And that doesn't mean that they have perfect relationships. Thank God that perfection is not the standard. But what it means is that they've experienced some things. And when I sat and heard Roy and his lovely wife Tiffany's story, and they're going to share a little bit about that today, it absolutely moved me. And so today we've got Roy. Roy's a certified master coach. He's a licensed minister. He's also a former professional wrestler, so you don't want to mess with Roy, and a chef. And, he is an absolutely heart-centered individual. And of course, his wife, Tiffany, and she's a certified leadership coach, along with a licensed minister and a former football player. That is pretty impressive, and, you don't look that big, Tiff. And so you must have relied on your speed, and you always had to watch the fast ones, The big ones don't worry about too much because they can't catch you anyways. And so this is going to be really, really awesome today. So I'm going to just turn my screen off, and I want to just turn it over to Roy and Tiff and just really hear what you've got to say. So welcome, Roy and Tiffany. Mitton, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for that great introduction, Abe. Welcome, everybody. And we wanted to start off today with a piece of research that really surprised us. And I think it's going to surprise you too. It certainly won't surprise me if it surprises you too. The Gottman Institute, which really are the leading relationship studiers in North America, they came up with a statistic that 69%, that's almost 3 in 4 arguments or conflicts that couples have will not be resolved. They will continue on throughout their long-term relationships. That no matter how many skills they have at conflict resolution, almost 3 out of 4 of the arguments that you or I or Tiffany or anybody has in their long-term relationships will compile and build up. And the reason for that is simply that people generally don't change. Their needs don't change, their expectations, wants, etc. And so, as my grandmother would often say, that which you cannot cure, you must endure. And by and large, that's a good strategy, because there are things in life that we can't change. So what we found, though, Tiff and I, is that most of the time when people are coming looking for relationship help with us, they're actually looking for conflict resolution. So conflict resolution skills is the hot topic, especially when we're trying to keep relationships healthy, when everything else is crazy, as the theme is today. But yet, if we look at statistics, from the Gottman Institute, they're saying that all of that effort is in a large part falling short. And of course, we can see this in our relationships today as a society. There's a lot of struggles today. There's a lot of struggles. One statistic alone in domestic abuse, it's up nearly. And one report I saw said in CTV News that the women's shelters and places like that have been up 600% in calls through this coronavirus reality. The fact is that when times get tough and we find ourselves in a situation that really matters to us, that skills will always fall to the wayside. They'll always fall short to what we believe about relationships. Skills will always be something that's in our head, and our beliefs are really at our core of who we are as a person and our heart. And so whenever our heart and our head come into conflict, especially when something really matters to us, like in our intimate relationships, where life gets played out at a different level behind closed doors, that's when we see that our hearts will always prevail. Our belief will always trump our skills.
Now, today we're going to be talking about personal and intimate relationships, but what we talk about today can be crossed over into all your relationships, your working relationships, because ultimately, if you find anybody that has a strong marriage and strong personal relationships, all the rest follow, because ultimately the relationships at home are the most toughest ones.
So to illustrate the difference between belief and skill, we thought we would resort to one of our favorite things, which is CFL football. We're going to use the game of football, and we're going to treat it as a conflict. The game of football is played with two teams, Tiffany and I, and
Go Stamps.
Go Stamps and go Eskies. And so we're hearing that there's a threat that the Battle of Alberta might not be played on Labor Day weekend. So at least you'll get to see the Battle of Alberta played out right here. So any of you CFL fans will not miss it. We're going to look at this ball. This ball is the problem, you see, because we both want to get it into each other's end zones because we want to win. And so whatever the problem is in our relationships, it's like a ball. And the purpose of the game of any sport, and football is no different, is to win the game. We play to win. So
we sure do. So if we both want this football in the opposite end zones, how is that going to work if it's the opposite end zones? Now, if we were in person, we would ask you guys, what do you guys think? But so today we're gonna tell you. So Roy, we both want to win. We both want to get this football in our end zone. How are we going to do that?
Well,
what are some options?
Why don't we call it a draw? We'll play like, or just maybe just call it a draw, and we'll go out and I don't know, go get some wings or wing night or something.
I don't know about you, but I don't want to be there when I tell Coach Dickinson that I'm going to settle for a draw. He wants me to win. Actually,
my favorite coach, Jason Moss, actually just got fired for that very reason. That's actually true. Well, we could play. Let's play for a tie. Let's play like an exhibition game, and we'll just go out on the field and have you ever seen those exhibition games where you almost think it's a tie? They're almost helping each other out. Maybe that's what we'll do. We'll play for a tie.
Ultimately though, the goal is to win the game. You don't get the trophy if you tie.
Well, Tiff, I'm at a loss. Are you coming to me saying that I'm going to come out on the football field, we're going to have the Battle of Alberta, and that I'm not supposed to win? Like I don't know.
No, of course we all need to win, especially in our relationships. We need to have a win-win.
Right. So what do you suggest? What do you suggest?
All your ideas are exhausted.
What other ideas is there?
You need to remember we're on the same team.
Oh, Tiffany.
So, as we've talked, in all seriousness though, have you forgotten that you're on the same team? So in your business relationships or at home in your marriage, especially at home, it can be difficult because we feel like we're on different teams. But ultimately, we want the same thing, relationship success. There we go. Stamps.
And I want to do a do-over. So now, Tiffany, we've got a problem.
Yes.
We've got a problem. This ball needs to go into the end zone of the Eskimos.
Yes.
So fire it over, and we'll get a touchdown. Now, that might be all fun and games, but it really is true. How many times can you imagine that couples, when things matter, forget the one thing? And that's that they're on the same team. Matter of fact, actually, a lot of the research leans towards that. The couples that have consistent conflict that erodes their relationship, one of the key factors is that one of them sees, or both see, each other as their opponent other than their team. That one belief change will overcome hundreds and hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars in trying to build better conflict resolution skills. If you can just come to the one change in your core belief, if you can go beyond the belief that you're against each other and realize that actually you're on the same team, you'll root for each other and you'll find that win-win situation. And so even if the conflict isn't resolved, you'll both be able to find that win-win solution that will actually strengthen your relationship, as opposed to take a tick and a tick and a tick away from the foundation each time.
So like Roy said, what we do in stress, our heart is going to win over our head. So it's like muscle memory. But we call it mental memory. When our head and our heart are going to be in conflict, our heart is going to be the one that prevails. So changing your beliefs will create relationship success.
And this, sorry, go ahead.
And so studies have shown that the leading reason a spouse will divorce their partner has nothing to do with what they did. So struggles as serious as having an affair or even spousal abuse never damage a relationship as much as a partner who tries to focus on fixing the issue rather than fixing the relationship's foundation. It's like an example that we've shared with a lot of couples, and it really hits home to them. It's like, why are you trying to rearrange the furniture on the sinking Titanic? So there's an old parable that I heard years ago. And when we share this with couples and families, it helps them in their relationships. So like the man who hires a carpenter to build him there's a man that hires a carpenter to help him build a house, but he only asks him to create the third floor. We need to see what we call third floor factors in our relationship, such as communication and resolving differences, only as strong as the foundation that it's built upon. So let's look from the foundation up, because with these 4 foundational qualities, when you focus on those, it's going to propel your relationship in a way that skills never can. So the most essential quality in a relationship, the first foundation, is safety. Now, when you think of safety, a lot of people think of physical safety, but in relationships, you need to have safety of your body, but also of your mind and spirit. Safety is a core fundamental need for everyone. So our brains are constantly, subconsciously scanning our surroundings, the events that are taking place, the people around us, and it's watching for safety. So multiple times, every single second, your subconscious mind is focused on safety. Now, if you're not safe, you're not going to be yourself. So I'd ask you for the next couple of minutes, think of relationships. Are there those relationships that you just don't feel like you can be yourself? Why is that? Physical safety is much easier to recognize, but what about that feeling in your mind and in your spirit? Now, in those cases, you're going to have the fight, flight, or freeze mode. In moments that matter, when the tensions are high, when everything else is crazy, it's going to be impossible to manage the relationship effectively and efficiently without the quality of safety. So feeling safe in relationships is being able to feel emotions, have an opinion, or take action or make a choice without being worried about what the other person's going to say or do, or how they're going to react. So each person has different needs and different things that are going to make them feel safe. So for example, when I grew up, swearing was non-existent. None of my parents, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, anybody around us, there was no swearing. Now, when I met Roy, just take a minute here. He's a maritimer from Nova Scotia, a professional wrestler, and a chef. So, maritimer plus wrestler plus Gordon Ramsay. You can imagine what swearing was like. In some cases, it was every other word. So 16 years ago, in the beginning of our relationship, when we would have conversations and Roy became passionate, he often started swearing. And to cope, I walked out of the room, also known as flight. And I would walk out mid-conversation. Roy would be left there sitting at the table like, what? What just happened? Though I didn't have the language for it back then, I didn't feel safe when he would swear. He eventually learned that if he wanted to have a conversation with me, there would be no swearing. So relationships require safety as the foundation of any thriving and robust connection. And only when we build our relationship on safety is it possible for us to be ourselves and feel free of intimidation. So finally, safety is your personal responsibility towards your partner. Your actions will determine the reality of how safe you are as an individual. The most essential quality a relationship needs is safety. It only takes one person to not feel safe, and anything built upon that will be shaky at best.
That is so true. And if I could say that we work sometimes in a group with men that go through a 30-week program looking at relationship essentials. And I say that if we spent 30 weeks simply studying focus on the belief about safety with our partners, that I think that would not be 30 weeks wasted. Even though there's eight other things that we want to talk about, really that fundamental, that we cannot reinforce it enough, that if that fundamental safety is not there emotionally, we cannot possibly build anything else on top of that. But if when we do establish safety, we would go to the second most critical part a fundamental part of a foundation in a relationship. And so we build it on top. If we used an analogy of like building a house, the second layer of bricks on that foundation would be respect. You know, respect is something that we all believe that we understand and know. But so what I've realized is that we infrequently are not able to articulate it. So as a matter of fact, for respect, feeding off of Tiffany's example of the swearing, you know, I used to say, well, I'm not swearing at you, I'm just swearing. I felt that I was being respectful. However, Tiffany did not feel that way. See, because respect is to value that individual, to value their opinions, to see their self-worth, recognize that they have opinions, and hear them, understand them, emotionally affirm them, and accept them as they are. Respect really is so critical and is such a struggle, as I said, on that second layer, because so often we believe that we are respecting somebody, but we really haven't even taken a look at articulating how they experience respect. Respect is just like safety. The person that's giving the respect has to make sure that it's more important in how the person receives that respect. It's important in our intimate relationships, but really it transfers to any relationship, business or personal. Respect is the second most important part of any firm foundation in a relationship.
For sure. And now the third quality in the foundation of a stable relationship or a family foundation is being accountable, truthful, and admitting it when you blow it. We're all going to make mistakes, some a lot more than others. We may fall far from the mark in being safe and respectful. It's the ability to it's the ability to accept responsibility, recognize the hurt and the natural consequences that your action or lack of action has had. So it's very important to support the person who has been hurt. So being accountable is the ability to make it about the person whose trust was betrayed or their feelings were hurt. Now, hurt is defined and measured by the person who was hurt. The hurt is defined and measured by the person who was hurt. You probably all heard the expression, we learn from our mistakes. But you know what? It's even better learning from someone else's mistakes. So like Roy was saying, when he was trying to understand why I found swearing so hurtful and offensive, I said to him, "You're swearing at me." And now the wrong response to that is, "No, I'm not swearing at you. I'm just swearing," which is what he would say.
Which is what I just said.
There is a great power in providing the opportunity to be heard, to give your undivided attention and allow the person who you hurt to express that, free of judgment, and for them to be understood. In our experience, and studies actually show, when there is a betrayal or a hurt in a relationship, the chance of moving past the incident is quite high. But the threat is when there's an inability to accept the responsibility and support the person who was hurt rather than providing excuses. So being accountable, to be truthful and admit your wrongs is built on top of safety and respect.
Now, the fact is that Maeve kind of alluded to it, so I thought I would bring this in accountability. The truth is that that's how Tiffany and I came into. We didn't step into relationship coaching and relationship ministry because we thought that was something that was neat and we'd like to get a certificate on the wall. Me being accountable is part of us sitting in front of this webcam right now talking to you. When I was with Tiffany in the beginning, when we first moved in together, the truth was that I had a life of domestic violence. And I grew up in domestic violence. So it was modeled in all of my intimate, my personal relationships with the people that mattered in my life. And then I, as an adult, decided that I would choose those behaviors also. If I was going to write a book on the idea of accountability, I would say this: without accountability, your relationship is hopeless. And so I'm not here to say that every relationship that has domestic abuse should be a survival story where the couple survive, because that's not the case. And if you were to take our story and glean that from it, it would be reckless of me. Our story was that I became accountable to Tiffany, and she chose to continue a relationship with me because I proved through my accountability that there was change. That's not for me to say that there was change, but for my partner to acknowledge that. And that's where we move into the fourth layer of the foundation of any strong relationship, regardless if there's domestic abuse there or not, because we all will let each other down. And that is having trust in the relationship. But trust is built through support. I think that one of the fundamental beliefs that we have about trust is so flawed, and yet trust is a game changer. Trust is not a root. It's the fruit. So it's not a decision, it's precision. It's something that we plant a seed of truth in fertile soil with accountability and respect and safety. And over time, in a due season, we will have a harvest of trust. So we either have trust or we don't. We can give it. However, if it isn't real trust that's been grown, it's almost like depending on the harvest before it comes. That you're trusting that all the things are going to be well in that season so that you can get a firm harvest. Trust without giving it a season of support is fatal at best. It's bound to be destructive, more destructive in the relationship. If I was going to bookend the effective parts of a relationship, the foundation of any firm relationship, any successful relationship, any thriving relationship, I would say that it's bookend on safety and trust. And that without those two things, you cannot have anything built on top of it. Kind of, if you were to think about it, it's like the Leaning Tower of Pisa versus the pyramids in Giza, the Great Pyramid. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is a tourist attraction. People like to go up to it and get their picture, like pushing, looking like they're holding it up. It's not something that anybody would take as a serious link in architecture, let alone that they'd move their daughter, into the upper floor of it and think that it was going to survive. It's merely a tourist attraction. But the Tower of Giza is the last remaining of the 8 wonders of the world. It's endured. All other 7 wonders are dead and gone because of the foundation. Any engineer would tell you, any architect would tell you that the wonder of the Pyramid of Giza has nothing to do with how high it was built, but the firmness of its foundation. That's in the end, the message that we have for you is that if you choose to take your skills and set them aside and look at the firm foundation and ask yourself, which do you want in your relationship? Do you want to build things quickly on top, like conflict resolution and communication, when the foundation isn't firm and what you'll get is the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Or do you want to take time and build a strong, firm foundation with those 4 factors that I said, that we talked about today? Safety, we talked about respect, we talked about being honest and accountable, and finally, trust by supporting those first 3. It's your choice to make the real kind of relationship that you have. And if you build a foundation like the pyramid in Giza, whatever you choose to put on top of that will be just like the 8th wonder or the 7th wonder of the world. It'll last beyond all the others and not be just merely a tourist attraction.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Roy and Tiffany, for sharing. Wow, what a lot of powerful truths. I have to admit, you do look better in red than I think it's green and gold of Edmonton, but then again, I'm a Calgarian, so I have to say that. But I want to key in on a couple of things because you guys are quite unique in the work that you do with respect to domestic violence, and I don't think that we need to hide from the fact that COVID-19 has likely made domestic violence worse. And so maybe just speak to that a little bit. I mean, if you're a woman right now and you're listening to this call and you're experiencing that, or maybe you're a parent and you suspect that, what are some thoughts for them right now?
Well, I think that the first thing is that the statistics have shown more phone calls to the police or to places like women's shelters. It's auspicious that you bring that up about not the loved ones that are being affected by domestic abuse in their own relationship, but actually like people like parents, because that's where the greatest rise in calls have been, is people concerned for people they love that they feel are trapped in isolation with someone who is hurtful. And I think that that's one of the things, is that because we don't know what is the foundations, the core beliefs about a healthy relationship, it's really hard to recognize an unhealthy one. And so there are weaknesses in the foundation. And so what happens is as pressure starts coming on, it's not that abuse all of a sudden comes, it's always been there. Because essentially I think that what I had to come to realize, Abe, is that abuse is about power and control over your partner. It's not about hitting or hair pulling or the things that we see maybe when it gets, the 911 calls get called. That's how it's played out in its extreme. But the vast majority of the hurt that I caused with Tiffany was in control. And if I was going to give advice to people out there, is that I would take a look at those 4 things. You know, do you feel emotionally safe in your relationship? And I'd actually even say that one alone is enough to recognize it, so that it doesn't get to a place of 911.
And actually, statistics show that it's less than 10% when these shelters are full right now, but that's actually less than 10% of the cases of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse, we look at as physical often, and a lot of people that we've ministered to struggle because they've never had a hand laid on them. But the hurt that has happened in their mind and their soul is irreplaceable, is just so damaging. There's actually a book, and a lady she's the director of the women's shelters in New York, and she said, her quote was, "I've seen what she called shelter women talk unabashedly about broken noses, and but when it comes down to the core, when they talk about emotional and verbal abuse, that the women just break down." So a lot of times there's such a stigma that's like, well, I'm not that bad, but I just want to encourage people that your hurt is your hurt, that it's not, you're not weak, or it's, I just need to grow tougher skin. If you're being hurt, it's your hurt.
Yeah, I can't say that enough, Abe. I think that as a society, we need to pull back and be very careful with that word abuse, because it's linked so much with hitting, quite frankly. And really, if we could start to just identify in relationships that hurt equals hurt, that if you don't feel emotionally safe with your partner, that's a red flag. And let's get the relationship, in support of the couple individually right off the bat. Then it won't get to the place where it does physically. Try, typically speaking, when we're talking to ladies or people who are being abused, they really struggle with that label abuse. And so stick to the tactics is what I would say, is that if you feel hurt, it's significant enough, and make that phone call, because there are agencies out there that want to help. And if you are somebody like a parent who has a concern for someone you love, I would recommend always to keep the word abuse off the side. Let them come up with that word. Just stick to the things that name the tactics that are being used in the relationship that are unacceptable. That will always be the best success plan, to have that person not become a label, but become a person. And really, that's what get lost in domestic abuse, Abe.
No, I think I would agree with that. And it's really not, if you've already crossed the line of making somebody feel emotionally unsafe, as much as it might be a shock, it's not a much further line to cross the physical line after that. Now, one of the questions that came up in the chat window, and it was a little while ago, but we were talking about, making sure the relationship was on the right foundation. And I think that's critical, because, hey, storms are going to come. We don't have to, have a crystal ball to determine that. But when that storm comes, and we need to be on that solid foundation. But what if, my partner, has a different belief system around the foundation than I do, so I've got a set of values, and you've got a set of values, and now, how do we choose which set of values we're going to go with, and what does that process look like, and I don't think this is kind of a religious question. I think it's really more about a values question. So what are your thoughts on that? First of all, my thought is that's a great question, and essential in today's age, because, in a place like Canada, we have so many different, different cultures and different worldviews. We're a very tolerant society.
And so, yeah, that's a fantastic question. The first thing I would say is that the things the beliefs that we have that we're talking about are core. I would really struggle to find a culture or belief system that says that I don't have a responsibility for Tiffany's emotional safety. We're really talking about getting to the core. The next thing I would say is that we do most of our work not in domestic abuse anymore. 10 years ago when we first got into ministry, 11 years ago, we were exclusively in domestic violence work. But today we're relationship coaches, and we work vastly in just making relationships better. And that's, so I would say that if you have some differences in values, get some help. That's why I love I call myself a relationship coach, not a counselor, because I think that the mindset of a counselor, not that there's anything wrong with that, is that oftentimes when people come to me for counseling, it's like their relationship is broken. But when we hire a coach, we're aiming to win. We're betting on it. And so, looking at getting support should be looking to become even better than you are and winning, as opposed to losing. Not because you guys are losing or because that your relationship should be cast away or those kind of things that hold us back, but actually saying, let's get some help now because we see that we're having some troubles relating to one another, and that we're going to get some coaching because we're a winning team. Every winning team has a coach. Every basketball player, no matter who they are, no matter baseball players or public speakers or anybody in this world that's a somebody, has a coach. And so why not your relationship?
It's great. Love it. Now I want to ask a question, and I really want to hear. I'll start with you, Tiffany, because I think this is really important for a woman to answer, and then I want to transition to you, Roy. But I was on a webinar yesterday where we were talking about one of my companies, Wellness Innovate. Our focus is on workplace mental health, and so we talked about suicide yesterday through COVID, and I already alluded to the fact that these numbers are high. And then when you actually break the suicide numbers down, and I'm not the expert, but we had an expert, and he shocked me with the numbers that he had, that the rate of suicide for men age 25 to 64 is actually double that of the average sort of human. And yet we also know that often violence, and I love how you framed it, Roy, and so many comments are in the chat window and on Facebook, where people are identifying that violence is more than just physical, it's also emotional. Absolutely. And I'm a man. I've experienced violence from men, both physically and emotionally. And men are often the perpetrators of this. And I think that women do it too. But maybe certain, in my view, not as much, and not with the consistency. And so, Tiffany, I want to ask you: Are these men all bad, and how can we help them?
Well, thank you for that question. And my first response is no. These men aren't all just bad. The choices they make are poor choices, but that doesn't make them a bad man. And that we believe in one of the reasons that we stepped out, because quite frankly, 10 years ago, or over 10 years ago, when Roy came to me, we'd had a few years where we were no longer living in violence, and life, this was before we had kids. And so life was, we were going on with life, and things were pretty good. And I looked at that time in our life as something that I was just going to sweep under the rug and kind of hope to forget. And then Roy came to me one day and said, you know what, there's no poster boys for men like me. There's nothing on the bus stops that say you can go get help. We have our beliefs, but and everybody can say what it means to them. But Roy had, just felt that call on his heart saying, you need to get help. And so he was actually, at the time, and when we were living in Calgary, the first man to call the women's shelter and say, I need help. And she said, well, this is a place for domestic abuse. And have you been abusive? And it was a hard question for him to answer, but he's like, yes. And so what that was, though, is there's such a stigma to, you know, if you're hurting the ones you love, that doesn't make you a bad person. You're not making the best choices right now, but there is hope. So definitely, you know, they're not bad. They need some help, and as Roy talked about, some accountability. And was there a second part to that question?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the second part is you know, how can we help them? Because, you know, I think, you know, you can't have a society where men are this dysfunctional and call it successful. And so how do we help these men?
Exactly. So the biggest thing is taking that stigma and the labels away. So if they're hurting, you know, and this is a hard thing for, especially if you're a parent watching your children getting hurt, is to reassure them to, you know, we're not babying them, but we're holding them accountable and saying, you need to get help. There is hope. You can change. It doesn't have to be this way. I think the biggest thing is removing those labels and taking that stigma away.
Yeah, and if I may, that really is the thrust, as Tiffany said. I didn't get arrested, though I should have, quite frankly should have. I would also say, though, that, you know, the vast majority of the hurt that I've caused people in this world has been emotional and verbal. But that doesn't take away that the stuff that I did physically, I should have gone to jail for. I picked up the phone in desperation because by the time I was 33, I tried everything I could to change my behavior. And I had thought I'd lost Tiffany, and I called the women's shelter in Calgary, and bless their hearts that they took me in. I didn't have a probation officer or a sentence, and I was sitting with a group of men that did. And it was in there, Abe, that I realized one fundamental thing was that I wasn't under the pressure of a stigma. I had walked in on my own, and so I wasn't just learning a journey of what not to do in an intimate relationship, but really I was starting to learn more what to do. We spend 66% of our time in a domestic abuse program working with men on what does a healthy relationship look like, as opposed to just dwelling on what was done that's bad. I think that men essentially are struggling because I so frequently find in my men's groups, no matter if it's a men's group that's for domestic abuse, or if it's simply for men who want to gather with men and learn about leadership and what it is to be a husband and father. I think that the fundamental thing is that men don't get real. We don't sit down and talk and get real. It's not something we're comfortable with. And that's something we need to, because that's exactly, suicide is the ultimate of isolation. And so it doesn't surprise me to see that twice the rate, the average rate that we're seeing that men are committing suicide, because they're not given even the culture of sharing their feelings. They are very uncomfortable with it. And so I think that for things to change, we need to start to recognize that men have feelings too, and that it doesn't do us any good to take a person and label them by what they've done, and move them forward and creating a sense of community with men that's talking about more than what we talk about on wing night when we're gathering around for some beer, but really deep-rooted fundamental talk about what's important to us and being able to express it. And I think that as I have seen that over the last 10 years, we've seen nothing. I've seen it in the men's ministry because, quite frankly, it's just me there. But what we've experienced in relationships, but in men as individuals, is a metamorphosis, like a caterpillar crawling into a cocoon. Nothing about that. Like it doesn't pack a bag and go into the cocoon and come out a beautiful butterfly. Think about that. It goes into that cocoon with what it has, and it comes out in metamorphosis. And I believe that more men can have more success, more prosperity, and more happiness in their lives if they simply can lay down any type of labels and stigmas and just come into a place like what we provide and get some help. It's not, again, like I said, it's so important to remember, it's not because you're a loser. it's because you're a winner. And I really believe that from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah.
And I believe that, Abe, also holding men ruthlessly accountable, anyone ruthlessly accountable to their behaviors. I'm not making light of things that happen. So ladies out there or people out there that have been hurt by somebody that they trusted, I am oftentimes even sometimes criticized for how I hold people accountable for what they do, but we still don't want to label them and build their identity around the mistakes they've made.
No, I think it's so good. And, I mean, my experience has been that most men, I don't want to say most because I guess that would mean I've met, 3 or 4 billion on the planet, but a lot of the men that I've met are very interested in getting help. The problem, right? One of the problems anyways, is that we have this culture, where we equate strength with silence. And if I have the courage to open up and not only, talk about maybe the hurt that I have caused, but also the hurt that I've experienced. Because, I know myself, raised in a fairly abusive environment, you don't then go out and say, hey, I'm going to go cause harm. But what's happening is you're living out the thing that you've experienced because you think that's normal. And so we need a redefinition of normal. And if you're a man watching this here today, I think both Roy and I and Tiff, we want to encourage you that you are loved, that you are accepted, that you can find help. But you have to have the courage to reach out and to start to own the situation. And like Roy says, it is about accountability, but it's also about not being labeled, right? You are not your worst moment. You're also not your best moment, right? We've all had amazing moments. I trust me, on my best day, I look pretty good. On my worst day, you probably want to lock me up. Thank God I'm not one of or the other. I'm both of those things at the same time. And so, Roy, there's a question here actually specifically to you from one of the ladies. She's saying, what are your thoughts on encouraging those to get the help they need when they are so stuck in believing their own stories that they're choosing not to get the help?
And thank you so much for asking that question, because I think that the one thing that people misinterpret about our journey is that we did it together. And quite frankly, if Tammy Wynette, if I never heard that song, Stand By Your Man, in the context of domestic violence, I'd be happy that belief that we teach of the Beauty and the Beast syndrome, of this beautiful princess meets the beast, and because she loves him so much and supports him and pours into him, that he becomes the prince, is one of the greatest myths that we can teach people that does so much damage. Tiffany checked out on me, and she, I call it the great power of powerlessness. I had to come to terms. Tiffany did not encourage me. She didn't even know I had called the women's shelter. In fact, she wouldn't have even known had I not been told by the women's shelter that part of my accountability was that they had untethered access to calling her. And so I had to call her and tell her that I'd signed up. So your question relates to the root of it, is that I think that people that are being affected by domestic abuse when their loved one is hurting them, they need to look after themselves, because the ultimate of abuse is about character assassination. And they need to become a whole person. And the person like myself who is choosing to hurt the one that they love, to choosing to abuse, it's up to them to see that their behavior is unacceptable because of their partner's rejection, and to stop believing the lies. And that's exactly it, is that I reconstructed the truth so I could live with the things I did. But deep down inside, I knew that what I was doing was reprehensible, repugnant, and incorrigible. But also the problem was, I thought was that if I ever admitted it to myself, that I could never recover. Nobody would ever give me a chance. The real cycle of abuse is, and I want to say this before I forget it, because this is, I think, the nutshell that is so critical, is that the real cycle of violence that we're forgetting about is that you could take Tiffany and rescue her from me, and Tiffany could never see me again another day in my life. But what does that say to the next lady that came along? Because before I met Tiffany, there was 2 other lives that I absolutely and utterly destroyed. Two little boys that never, that didn't deserve to have a father like me, that I utterly destroyed. And so the real cycle of abuse is that when we don't look at people like people and we think they're a problem that we just have to get rid of, and that problem just becomes somebody else's. So it's this gentle balance of saying, I love you, but what you're doing is absolutely unacceptable, and then leaving it up to that person to get the help. Now, like I said to the mayor of Halifax when he asked me to come and talk, which I was quite proud of, about domestic abuse, I said to him, but where do you say to men, go get help? Because unless you've had specific training for domestic violence intervention, you will be using a psychological model that quite frankly makes the problem worse, not better. And so that's, I think, one of the struggles that we're facing is, where do men get help? Because we minister at Masquerade Ministries to men all over the country, the States, as far away as Africa. We've helped men because there is so little help for that specific problem. And but leaning lastly to that lady's question is, you present the problem to them if you're safe enough to do so, because if you don't have emotional safety, that alone might be a problem. And then you have to leave it in their hands, because you can't make it any better. That's the great power in the powerless that you have in this, is that when you recognize that you can't say enough, you can't do enough, that nothing that you have done this is not your fault. This is nothing that you've done, it makes it your fault. Nothing you've said, it doesn't matter. Any mistake that you've made, those are just leverages that I would use over Tiffany to control her. The reality was that 100% of the responsibility and accountability for the harm that I caused had to rest on my shoulders. And so that's the journey that we walk on with ladies in ministry, is to help them to become whole again and to let go of this nagging idea that they think that they can walk on enough eggshells or say the right thing this time or go to see the right counselor, and that it's going to turn around.
And when you give them those options and you say, I love you, but this is a problem and something needs to be done about it, you can then base your decision, like if they decide to get help, you can base a decision on that, what you're comfortable with. But if they just say, no, screw you, this is me, or you're stuck with me, then you can make decisions from there. But you put it out on the table, and then you can make your decisions accordingly. There's no excuse for abuse. This is not a relationship problem. It's a power and control one. Marriage counseling or relationship counseling will make it worse, not better. That the fundamental part of this is that the loved one that is being hurt has to come to a belief that they are not participating in this abuse. There is no excuse for abuse, and that it's not because of temperament or mental illness or alcohol or any of the things that we typically. It's not because of how we were raised, because I was raised in a home that was violent, and I chose violence. But you're talking also to another gentleman who was raised in a home that was violent that chose differently. So the odds are actually only about 10% of men that grow up in domestic abuse will choose to do the same to their partners. And so the idea that the myth is that there's some excuse for the reason why Roy did what he did. And the real excuse is that I had a belief system that allowed me to dominate my intimate partner. That has to change. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what Tiffany's behavior was. It doesn't matter what her beliefs were. It never excuses me dominating her, ever.
Yeah, and I think that where there's been a lot of comments in the box about women who may perpetrate abuse as well, and yep. I think that the language of control actually does help equalize it, because though a man may use their physical advantage to try to dominate, I mean I've done lots of marriage counseling over the years, and I've seen just as much control from women who may not use the physical side, but they'll use other ways to exert control. And so I love the conversation through that lens, because really, what should I be seeking to control? Well, myself, so that I can become a good human being who's going to love and care for the people that I get to do life with. And then if everyone's doing that, well, we're all going to respect each other, and we're going to create that environment of safety you talked about.
Yeah, and that's the what you're talking about there. Bilateral abuse is a hot topic today, and the idea that there's an acknowledgement in society especially in Canada, that men are being abused also. And a lot of research is being done on that. We're not particularly believing that. I don't necessarily believe this is a gender problem. It's a power and control problem. And if men in general have had power and control over their partners, then it can be exercised. But I think of that the scientist in the wheelchair, Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking, and Tiffany researched on him, and it was suggested that there was something going on with his second wife, that there was abuse being carried out because he was completely vulnerable to her. And the essence is, if you want to know where the abuse is, look for the vulnerability. Because when we exercise control over somebody who is vulnerable, that's abuse.
So it's not necessarily like where I said, it's not a gender thing. It's a vulnerability and who has the power and control in the relationship.
Yeah, and this would be more something for a workshop to go deeper into. But I do want to put a warning out there, cautionary tale that in my first relationship, I went stumbling into an emergency room many years ago with a cut down my side because she had attacked me with a plate and cut me. And as I was stitching, they were stitching me up. I was crying and sobbing, about how she's always hurting me. And the nurse was a very gentle lady and a very kind-hearted. And she broke down and had to leave. She left as they were stitching me. And she came back and she gave me materials that basically said that I was being abused. And if you would have seen what my 2-year-old son saw before she threw the plate, I don't think there's a jury in the world that would ever hesitate to say that was abuse on my part. And I hadn't laid a finger on her. And I know that nurse didn't mean my family any harm, but I did walk away there thinking, because I was cut, that I was the one being abused, and I went home twice as entitled. And the reality is that one of the realities that I came in the women's shelter thinking was that I came to realize that I felt like I was the victim whenever I hurt my partner, and that if I wasn't doing anything physical, then I wasn't. I felt like she was hurting me, and I was just defending myself. But what I came to realize, and I see this so often, is that men sometimes are like elephants in the room with a mouse. And we're scared of the mouse, and we're intimidated by that mouse. But the only person in the room that's really got something to worry about is that mouse. And as we're thrashing around, scared of the mouse, that mouse can't just stop running about. And that's the best analogy I can draw, is that times and times that I was in relationships with Tiffany, in situations in a relationship where I felt like she was being completely disrespectful, that I was not taking into account the lack of safety that I put her in the begin with. And I wasn't counting on that tension and how she was acting in it. It's something called survival mode. So please hear me when I say this. I'm not saying that there is only one gender that creates domestic abuse. But what I am saying is I've never met a man in 10 years, and then in all the years previous that I grew up with, all the men that I saw hurt their wives, that didn't swear on a stack of Bibles and pass every lie detector that if they were tested to say that they were the one that was the victim. And I think that we just can't talk about gender and abuse without putting that into account, is that the very psychological makeup of an abusive person is that they are the victim. That's how they're justifying their behaviors.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
well, this has been amazing and such a great conversation. We could for sure go on forever, but in the middle of COVID-19, the hard work of relationships doesn't go away. And this is about business resilience. But the truth of the matter is, it's going to be tough to be business resilient if your primary relationships aren't on that solid foundation, like you said. I mean, and so as we bring it to a conclusion today, Tiffany, how can people get a hold of you guys if they want to reach out for some more help or some support?
Well, we have our website, and we have www.roymitten.com. We also have masqueradeministries.com. Our other websites we're in the process of building. So, and you can also reach out on Facebook, Roy and Tiffany Mitton, and we'd love to talk to you and help you and support you as we can.
So roymitten.com and masqueradeministries.com. And so, Roy, what are some of the services that you guys are offering?
Well, I know that's the thing that I really wanted to press is that don't wait, or don't just put yourself in a corner of just abuse. We work anywhere from premarital to divorce care. We do any level of relationship investment. So we could do enrichment, we do intervention, we do the premarital, and then of course also we specialize, as any family ministry should. Any marriage ministry should be experts at domestic abuse, which we are. So it really doesn't matter if you want your relationship to be more. I really think that we've got something in store for you. And so from the very beginnings, the roots of getting your relationship off on a good foot, all the way even to impacting, helping your kids in divorce, and because they get divorced too. We really have something for everybody. That's one thing we all will have. Likely the likelihood that we will be in a long-term intimate relationship is very high, and so we've really tried to not narrow the focus to miss out on people, because every family matters. No family should be forgotten.
That's great. Well, and so folks, those of you who are listening, either on the webinar itself or maybe on YouTube later, checking out the recording, or those of you who may be following us right now on Facebook, please do reach out to Roy at mitton.com. That's ROYMITTON.com, or masqueradeministries.com. Their focus is on helping families thrive. And, I think it's so important that we understand that Roy and Tiffany, they're not about abuse, they're about thriving. And sometimes you have to work through the stuff on the way to where you want to be. But I can tell you their entire focus is helping families and relationships at all levels to thrive. And so they're also life coaches, business coaches, leadership coaches. So please do reach out. And again, we just want to keep sending out a message of hope, right? There is hope no matter what your situation, no matter what you're going through today. Reach out to Roy, reach out to Tiffany. You can absolutely reach out to me. You know that. And we'll do anything we can to support you. So, Roy, Tiffany, 1 or 2 minutes, just any final words?
Well, first I would say is that it would be irresponsible for us not to say that if you are in any imminent danger, to call 911. And the second is I really want to encourage people to not put labels on their relationships, but just get the help. If you don't have certainty in your relationship, that's what we bring is clarity. And so I just want to encourage people that where they're at, if they think that they want more in their relationship, hold the labels aside and save the fact that you're feeling that you're in physical danger and that you would call 911. Let's just get some clarity. Let's clear the fog banks, and so that you can move forward. The labels are oftentimes what hold us back the most, because we feel that labels define us. And really, as you said, Abe, it's really who we are as a person that defines us, not the things that we've done in the past.
Yeah, and I would say with right now, with a 50% divorce rate, 1 in 3 relationships experience abuse. You can't help but know somebody that you care about or love that might be in one of these relationships. So we do also do workshops to help look for warning signs and red flags if you're not too sure, or how do you approach those relationships, because sometimes, unfortunately, with the best intentions, you might do more harm. So I just encourage you, if there are relationships, to keep, or first of all, to keep your eyes and ears open to those around you, because there are lots of relationships hurting and struggling, and to look into it. And if you're not too sure how to approach that, please feel free to reach out to us, because there's lots of people who are hiding and in isolation but need that connection. So to just encourage you to connect with them.
That's so good. Well, we've got the right people on the call today. So thank you, Roy. Thank you, Tiffany. I'm honored to work with you, as a coach, and lots of positive feedback in the chat window. People just celebrating, your vulnerability, your courage today. So thank you for that. And listen, folks, hey, you can be socially, sort of distant, physically distant, but not socially isolated. So make sure you reach out and listen. Don't put your trust in the government to solve your problems either, because that's not going to help. And so if you're interested in building your business, getting it to stand up, trying to figure out your way out of this financial mess now that we put ourselves in, please do reach out. And I'd be very happy to hop on a call. I know Roy, Tiffany would as well. So thanks, Roy. Thanks, Tiffany. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Next week, we have an unbelievably special guest, and that's going to be happening on Thursday, June the 4th at 11:45 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So we'll see you right then. Take care, everybody. And thanks, Roy and Tiff.
Thank you.
Hey.